Pentecost is known as the birthday of the church, but long before Pentecost became a Christian celebration, it was and still is an important Jewish celebration. It was a harvest festival celebrated 7 weeks after the beginning of the harvest. So at Pentecost, diaspora Jews who were living all over the known world at the time traveled to Jerusalem for the harvest festival at Pentecost. So it is now 50 days after the death and resurrection of Jesus, around the year 36 AD. Jerusalem is flooded with people from all over the world for the festival. The disciples are still in Jerusalem, hiding out, still lying low, not wanting to draw attention to themselves. Scared that they will be next on the Romans' duty of executing them. But on the Jewish Pentecost, with pilgrims from all over the world, remember, something remarkable happens. It's one of those extraordinary events that doesn't translate very well. In the telling of it years later, the gospel writer chooses extravagant language and interesting images to describe what happened. Rushing wind, tongues of fire. And before we know it, those scared disciples are no longer afraid. They find their voices and the courage to use them. They begin to speak to people and to tell their story to all of those people in Jerusalem. And what's so crazy is that everyone understands them. Now remember, these are people from all over the world, so they speak different languages. But they can understand what is being said by their disciples. That's the miracle of Pentecost. It's basically a reversal of the story known as the Tower of Babel. You remember the Tower of Babel story way back in the book of Genesis? People were trying to build a tower all the way to heaven, trying to be like God, trying to reach God. And so God decides to confuse them, the story says. And instead of speaking one language so they can communicate to build the building, God makes them all have different languages so they can't communicate with each other. And then God scatters them all over the world. This is an ancient story meant to explain why people all over the world speak different languages. But here in the book of Acts, the exact opposite happens. The writer of the story wants us to know that the whole world was there in Jerusalem with its wonderful diversity, racial, cultural, linguistic differences. And the writer wants us to know that in God's active, creative, transforming presence, there is a power to transcend that diversity and create something new, a united community, people understanding one another. The miracle of Pentecost seems mostly to be a miracle of communication, a miracle about understanding each other and bringing people together. This is the work of the Holy Spirit, bringing us together, being a bridge to unite us instead of dividing us. The first time I met my wife, Sherry, we were alone in a car for 4.5 hours driving from New York City to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I so enjoyed our conversation and our time together, and Sherry seemed to also. We seemed to connect and to understand each other in a special way. Some people call it love at first sight or falling in love, but I think it's more accurate to say that Pentecost happened. God's Spirit was active, helping us to understand and to communicate to each other in a special way. Looking back at it, it was indeed a miracle, because those of you who know us know that we are about as different as two people can be. Sherry's from the north, I'm from the south. Sherry's an only child. I have family reunions every week. I like spontaneity. Sherry prefers things planned and scheduled. Sometimes we see things very, very differently and don't understand each other. But on April 11th, 1983, Pentecost happened. I connected with her in a way I'd never connected with anyone. Understood someone and was understood by someone in a special way. Pentecost may not happen for us every day, but I believe Pentecost is always trying to happen. That God's Spirit is moving, trying to break down our walls and our barriers, trying to build bridges between people. Unfortunately, there are things that often get in the way, things that can block the movement of God's Spirit: arrogance, pride, ego, greed, fear, insecurity. These are things that get in the way of bridge building, get in the way of people understanding one another and connecting with each other. And so it's very important for us to ask ourselves constantly how we can be better bridge builders. What can we do to draw people to us and to one another? How can we live in harmony? Some very practical ideas came to me a long, long time ago from a rather odd source. Some of you may remember this serendipitous experience I had in a car over 20 years ago. At the time, my car was broken down and was in the shop being fixed, as it happens to be this weekend too. I guess you'd call that a wow moment, right? Since my car was out of commission, I was driving Sherry's car, and I turned the power on for the radio, and she had a CD playing in it. And so it started playing the CD, and it was the soundtrack of the movie Sleepless in Seattle, which is a pretty good movie, but it has an even better soundtrack. It's wonderful. It has a wide variety of songs that feature different styles of music with different vocalists from different eras. It's a great one. Get it if you don't have it. One of the songs I was listening to was sung by Joe Cocker. If you are not familiar with Joe Cocker, he was an English rock and roll performer, sang at Woodstock. He was known for his gritty, gravelly, raspy voice and for making spasmodic movements when he sang. One of his songs went kind of like this, you know it. You are so beautiful to me. You are so beautiful to me. Can't you see? You're everything I hope for. Oh yeah. You're everything I need. You are so beautiful to me. All right. You remember that? Hey, can you imagine going to an agent and saying, I've got this singer who sounds as though he is chewing glass when he sings, and he's going to sing a song that just repeats the same phrase over and over and over again, and by the way, it's going to be at the top of the charts for a long, long time. I love Joe Cocker, but I'm sure there are a lot of people who wouldn't have been drawn to Joe and his style of music. My grandmother, for instance, she wouldn't have liked Joe Cocker and his style of music. I could see her shaking her head now and saying, you call that music? How can you listen to that stuff? What's the world coming to? Music. And so I'm thinking about this as I'm driving and listening to the soundtrack, and then something really strange happens. I hear two more singers on the CD who have worse voices than Joe Cocker. And here's the really strange part. My grandmother loved them. My mother loved them. I even loved them. In fact, they will go down as two of the most liked, most loved performers of all time. Here's the next voice I heard.
Hello, Dolly. Well, hello, Dolly. It's so nice to have you back where you belong.
What in the world was that? Do you know what a toadfish is? Have you ever caught a toadfish? If a toadfish could sing, I think that's what it would sound like.
Hello, Dolly.
Right. If our choir sounded like that today, none of you would be back next week. The voice, of course, was that of Louis Armstrong's, who had perhaps the strangest voice of all time. Then another song started playing.
Ink, a dink-a-dink, a dink-a-dink, a dinky-doo.
It's the voice, of course, of Jimmy Durante, who has an even gravelier voice than Joe Cocker. Not only did Jimmy Durante sound like a cement mixer, did you know he could not hold a note? Couldn't hold a note. Everything was chopped off.
Ink, a dink-a-dink, a dink-a-dink, a dink-a-doo.
And my grandmother is complaining about Joe Cocker? Jimmy Durante and Louis Armstrong would not make it past the first round of the Savannah On Stage competition, but they will go down in history as two of the most liked, most beloved, most successful performers of all time. How did they do it? How were they able to cross generational boundaries? How did they get people to like them when their singing voices made Joe Cocker sound like a nightingale? How did they connect with people and build bridges? One thing they both knew was that phrasing makes all the difference. Phrasing makes all the difference. Jimmy and Louis might not have had good voices, but they knew that what you say and how you say it and when you say it can make all the difference. I encourage you to go on the internet and Google Jimmy Durante singing. You can see some of his live performances, but he really doesn't sing songs. He basically speaks them. He speaks his songs, and he has the audiences in tears. He was so good with his interpretation and with his phrasing. But that phrasing didn't just happen. It took practice and thoughtfulness. He had to think through the entire song and process it and practice it. When we speak to someone, it should be thought through. We should think before we speak, or before we email, or before we text, or Twitter, or tweet, or whatever it is you other people do. I don't do that stuff. We should ask ourselves, is this the right thing to say? Is it the right way to say it? Is it the right time to say it? Am I saying it when I'm stressed out or angry, or when I'm calm and rational? Is it the right tone to say it in? Is it the right attitude? How do you think this person will hear it? Or better yet, if I was in the person's shoes, would I want to hear it? Phrasing is so important. What you say, how you say it, and when you say it makes a big difference. And related to this issue is, how do we deal with our anger? Anger can affect our phrasing, of course. Everyone gets angry, and anger in itself is okay. The question is, do we deal with it? Do we get it under control, or do we let it control us? Do I have so much stress in my life that I'm having trouble dealing with anger, and I need to find a way to lower the stress? All of this makes a difference in how we communicate with others, in building bridges of understanding. Phrasing makes all the difference. Another thing we observe about these two successful performers is that they loved people. When you watch Jimmy and Louie perform, you sense that they really cared about you, and people in turn cared about them. Jesus said, "What you give will be given back to you." Be interested in people, and they will be interested in you. The fact is, we are ego-centered people. We all like to talk about ourselves and share our stories and what's happening with us. But try listening first. And not just being quiet for a while, waiting for your turn to talk, but really listening, asking questions, being curious. It will do wonders for you if you start being curious about others. It will help you build a bridge. And one of the most famous songs that Jimmy Durante sang was "Make Someone Happy." The lyrics are, "Love is the answer. Someone to love is the answer. Make someone happy, and it will make you happy too." If you want people to start caring about them first, this is a great way for bridge building to happen. Another thing we observe about Louie and Jimmy is that they were flexible and adaptable. Both Louie and Jimmy played jazz music. They played jazz their entire life. It was their specialty. If you play jazz, you have to be flexible. You have to be open to spontaneity. You have to go with the flow and be adaptable to change. Being flexible and adaptable is really an act of faith, isn't it? It's saying all will be okay no matter what. Also, being flexible and adaptable helps us grow. We are willing to try new things. I love seeing the old Jimmy Durante shows with Jimmy doing a sketch in front of a live studio audience, and the best moments always happen when something goes wrong in the skit. When someone or some prop messes up, and Jimmy has to improvise. You can tell he's comfortable with it. He has fun with it. He's able to laugh at himself, and his adaptability and flexibility soon have you laughing too. If we want to build bridges, if we want to connect with others, it's best that we be flexible and adaptable, that we can react positively when things don't go our way. Which leads me to another thing we observe about these two performers. Each of them had a wonderful sense of humor. Did anyone have a better smile than Louis Armstrong? Could anyone smile better with a twinkle in his eyes than Jimmy Durante? These two musicians always seemed to find the joy in the moment. And they could laugh at themselves. They didn't take themselves too seriously. One was nicknamed Satchmo, which was short for satchel mouth, a big mouth. And the other was named the Great Schonozzola, a big nose. You got to have a sense of humor with nicknames like that. This kind of spirit and attitude made them humble and vulnerable and honest and authentic. This is the kind of spirit that draws people and helps us to build bridges. One other thing that they both knew is that your accompaniment makes you. Your accompaniment makes you. They knew that even though they were solo acts, they did not do it alone. They knew the importance of having the good pianist and the other musicians. And when they would come in at certain times in their song, it was a team effort, even though it was a solo act. They knew the importance of having others in their lives surrounding them. They knew that nobody makes it alone. I heard Oprah Winfrey last week giving an address to graduates, and she kept saying it over and over again. Nobody makes it alone. Joe Cocker recorded one of the Beatles songs, and it became a big hit for him. I get by with a little help from my friends. Nobody makes it alone. So let us know how important others are in our lives, how important it is to connect with people and to build bridges. Let us continue making it a wonderful world.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them blue for me and you. And I think to myself, yeah, what a wonderful world. Yeah, baby, baby, baby. That's right. I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Oh, yeah.
Wow, talk about jazz and spontaneity. I didn't know the trumpet was going to play today. Thank you, yeah. Wonderful. Will you turn with me to number 13?